The morning my grandmother was buried, I counted 17 flower arrangements around her casket. 17. My father had ordered exactly 2 of them. I know because I saw the receipt on the kitchen counter of the house he was already planning to take from me. I stood at the edge of the cemetery in the gray November cold, watching the last of the guests drift toward their cars, and I thought about all the Sunday afternoons I had spent in that little farmhouse in Clarksville, Tennessee, sitting at my grandmother's kitchen table while she taught me to make biscuits from scratch, listening to her tell stories about my grandfather, who had died before I was born, whose hands had built the porch and dug the garden and planted the 2 oak trees that still flanked the front door. Her voice when she told those stories was the warmest sound I had ever heard. Warmer than anything my father ever said to me. His name is Gerald. He is my father. And at the moment they lowered her into the ground, he was standing 3 feet away from me without once looking in my direction. My name is Clara. I am 31 years old. I have been a registered nurse for 7 years, and I spent 4 of those years working overnight ICU shifts so I could have my days free. Not to sleep. Not for myself. To drive 40 minutes each way to Clarksville twice a week to sit with my grandmother, Dorothy, and make sure she had groceries, company, her prescriptions filled, and someone who remembered her name without being asked. My father visited 4 times in the last 3 years of her life. 4 times. I know because she told me, and because I could hear the loneliness in her voice every single time I called. She never complained directly. She just got very quiet in a way that said everything she was too gracious to say out loud. My uncle Richard, my father's younger brother, visited even less. He lives 40 minutes in the other direction, in Nashville, in a house with a finished basement and a boat he takes out twice a summer. He had time. He chose differently. My cousin Deanna, Richard's daughter, I think visited twice. Both times around the holidays, both times with a casserole dish and a camera, because she posted photos. None of that mattered to me then. I was not there to keep score. I was there because I loved her. Because when I was 9 years old and my parents were in the middle of a divorce that tore through our family like a fire, my grandmother was the only adult who sat me down and said, "You are going to be okay, sweetheart. You are going to be more than okay." And I believed her. What I did not know, standing at that graveside, was that the paperwork she had signed 2 years earlier, the paperwork that left her home and her small plot of farmland to me, exclusively, with a certified estate attorney in Nashville as the executor, was already being contested. I did not know that my father had found a different attorney. I did not know he had drafted a counterdocument claiming that my grandmother had been of unsound mind when she made her decisions. I did not know that within 72 hours of her burial, my entire life was about to tilt sideways. He called on a Wednesday. 3 days after the funeral. I was at home, still, in the process of taking bereavement leave from the hospital, still answering condolence texts, still finding her handwriting on notepads around my apartment because she used to leave me little notes when she visited. He did not ask how I was doing. He said, "Clara, we need to talk about the property." I remember the kitchen going very still around me. I remember setting down my coffee mug carefully, like something fragile. "What about it?" I said. "Your uncle and I have been talking. The house has been in this family for 60 years. It shouldn't go to one person. That's not fair to the rest of us." I kept my voice even. She made her wishes clear, "Dad. The estate attorney has the original documents. Those documents," he said, with a pause that landed like a warning, "are being reviewed." I asked him what that meant. He said it meant what it meant. He said Grandma Dorothy had been confused in her final years, that anyone who spent time with her could see that, and that there were people prepared to testify to that effect. Then he said something that I will never forget for the rest of my life. He said, "You have to understand, sweetheart, that Evan needs a fresh start. Except my brother's name is not Evan. My brother's name is not anything, because I don't have a brother." He meant my cousin Tyler, Richard's son, who had just gotten out of his second DUI and was living in a spare bedroom in Nashville. He called his nephew sweetheart to soften what he was saying to his daughter. Let that sit for a moment. I did not argue. I said I would look into it and call him back. Then I sat at my kitchen table for a long time without moving. And then I did what I always do when something threatens to knock me down. I got methodical. Her name is Patricia Dunn. She is an estate and property law attorney in Nashville, and I had met her twice before, once when my grandmother first drew up her will, once when a codicil was added the following year. She remembered me. More importantly, she remembered everything. I called her that same afternoon. I explained what my father had said. I heard her exhale slowly on the other end of the line. "Clara," she said, "your grandmother was one of the most clear-minded clients I have ever worked with. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she documented why. We have her recorded statement. We have her physician's notes from the same period confirming full cognitive capacity. Whatever your father is attempting, it is not going to hold up. But here is what Patricia also told me. It did not have to hold up to cause damage. A contested estate could drag on for months. The house could be tied up in legal limbo, and if my father's attorney filed an emergency injunction claiming disputed ownership, I might not be able to take possession of the property until it was resolved. I thought about the house sitting empty through a Tennessee winter. I thought about the oak trees my grandfather had planted. I thought about the kitchen where I had learned to make biscuits. Tell me what I need to do, I said. Patricia told me. I did every single thing she said. The following week I drove to Clarksville and met with the estate attorney, a man named Howard Beckett who had worked with my grandmother for over a decade. He confirmed what Patricia had told me. He also told me something new. He had already received a formal letter from a firm in Nashville, challenging the will's validity and citing undue influence, meaning they were claiming I had pressured an elderly woman into leaving me her house. I sat across from Howard's desk and felt something cold move through me that was not quite anger and not quite fear. It was clarity. The kind of clarity you get when you realize that someone you have tried to love, for your entire life, has decided to treat you like an obstacle. I called my father that evening. He answered on the second ring, which told me he had been waiting. I know about the letter, I said. Silence for a moment. Then, I told you we were reviewing things. You accused me of manipulating a dying woman, I said. Your mother. My grandmother. The person I drove to 80 miles round trip, twice a week, for 4 years, while you visited 4 times. I never said it was you specifically, he said, which was not a denial and both of us knew it. Dad. I steadied my voice. She left me that house because I was there. I was there because I loved her. If you had been there, maybe she would have included you. But you weren't. That's not fair, he said, and his voice had shifted into something harder. I had responsibilities. I had a business to run. So did I said. Night shifts. A 40-minute drive twice a week. I figured it out. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, you need to be reasonable about this, Clara. Tyler needs a place to land. He's had a rough year. And there it was. The same architecture as always. Tyler's need. Tyler's rough year. Tyler's fresh start, all of it more important, more pressing, more real than anything I had built or earned or done. I'm going to need you to stop calling, I said. Until this is resolved legally, I think it's better if we don't speak. He started to say something. I ended the call. I want to tell you that I felt strong after that. I didn't. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a CVS in Clarksville and cried for about 20 minutes. Not because I doubted myself. Not because I thought he was right. But because grief is strange, and I had just buried my grandmother, and the person who was supposed to grieve alongside me was using her death to take something from me. That particular kind of hurt doesn't have a name, but anyone who has felt it will recognize it immediately. I drove to the farmhouse after that. I had a key, I had always had a key. I walked through the front door and stood in the entryway where the old coat rack still held one of her cardigans, the blue one she wore every winter, and I said out loud to nobody, I am going to protect this. Then I started making calls. Patricia connected me with a property rights attorney named Marcus Webb, who specialized in contested estate cases. Marcus was calm, precise, and reassuring in the way that very competent people are reassuring, not by telling you everything will be fine, but by telling you exactly what each step looks like and letting that steadiness do the work. He reviewed everything Howard Beckett had. He pulled the recorded statement my grandmother had made, explaining her intentions. He noted the physician's documentation of her cognitive health. Their claim of undue influence has nothing to support it, he said during our second call. No witnesses. No contemporaneous documentation. Just assertion. Will that stop them? I asked. It won't stop them from filing, he said. But it will stop them from winning. What Marcus also recommended, and this turned out to be the most important thing, was that I take physical possession of the property as soon as possible. Not aggressively, not confrontationally, but clearly and documentably. Change the locks with a licensed locksmith. Install a security camera at the front and back of the property. Begin utility transfers. Introduce myself to the neighbors as the new owner. Is something going to happen? I asked. He paused in a way that told me he had seen this before. When there is contested property, he said carefully, people sometimes act on assumptions before the legal process concludes. It is better to have documentation of your legitimate possession. I did everything he said within 4 days. The neighbor next door was a woman named Helen, mid-60s, white hair, the kind of person who brings actual food when someone dies and not just condolences. She had known my grandmother for 30 years. When I introduced myself and explained that I had inherited the property, she looked at me over the fence and said, Dorothy talked about you every week, honey. Every single week. She said it like it settled something, and I suppose it did. I went back to work. I slept badly. I checked the camera notifications on my phone more than I should have. 3 weeks after the funeral, on a gray Saturday morning, the notifications came. I was still in bed. My phone lit up at 7:43 with motion alerts from both the front gate and the side entrance of the property. I sat up and opened the app. On the front camera I could see a gray sedan and a black SUV parked on the gravel drive. 4 people were getting out. My father. My Uncle Richard. Deanna, my cousin, and a man in a jacket I didn't recognize carrying a soft-sided briefcase. I watched on my phone screen as they walked toward the front door. I called Marcus first. He answered in 2 rings. I told him what I was watching. He said, "I'm on my way. Do not go there alone. Call the non-emergency line for the county sheriff, and tell them you have individuals at your property who may be attempting unauthorized entry." I called the sheriff's non-emergency line. I explained the situation clearly. I was the documented owner of a property under contested estate proceedings. There were individuals currently present at the property without my permission. I had video documentation, and I wanted a deputy on the scene before I arrived. The dispatcher was professional. She said she would send someone. Then I got dressed. I drove 40 minutes to Clarksville. My hands were steady on the wheel the whole way, which surprised me. I think I had been expecting this. I think some part of me had been expecting it since that first phone call. When I turned onto the property road, I could see them standing on the front porch. My father was trying the door handle. The man with the briefcase was looking at documents. My uncle was standing slightly apart, arms folded, doing the thing he always did, which was participate in wrongdoing while maintaining deniability through posture. A sheriff's deputy cruiser was parked at the edge of the drive. The deputy, a young man with a calm face named Officer Garrett, I later learned was standing near his vehicle watching. I parked and got out. My father turned when he heard my car door. For just a moment, something moved across his face that was not quite guilt and not quite surprise, but somewhere between them. Then it settled back into the familiar expression, the one that said he was the adult and I needed to understand how things worked. "Clara," he said. "I'm glad you're here. We need to have a conversation. Who is this person?" I said, looking at the man with the briefcase. "He's a representative from our attorney's office. He is on my property without my permission," I said. I was calm. I was remarkably calm. "This is private property. I have documentation of ownership. There is a camera at the front gate and one at this door, both of which recorded your arrival." My uncle stepped forward. "Now let's not make this dramatic, Clara. We're family. We're just here to talk. You didn't call," I said. "You didn't text. You drove here on a Saturday morning with a representative from a law firm. That is not a family conversation. That is a strategy." Deanna started to speak something conciliatory, the way she always did when things got tense, and that was when Marcus pulled up. He stepped out of his car in a gray coat, carrying his own briefcase, and crossed the gravel with the unhurried walk of someone who has walked into exactly this kind of scene before. He introduced himself by name and credential to the deputy. Then he turned to my father's representative. "I'm Miss Clara's legal counsel," he said. "I'm going to need to see the documentation you're operating under today." The man with the briefcase looked at my father. My father looked at Marcus. Something shifted in the air. "We're here regarding the estate dispute," the man said. "The dispute is in pre-litigation," Marcus said. "Nothing has been filed. There is no court order. There is no injunction, which means this property belongs to my client, legally and currently, and you are all trespassing." My uncle made a sound. "Trespassing? She's our family." Marcus didn't look at him. He was still looking at the representative. "I'm going to need you to produce documentation giving you any legal standing to be on this property today. If you cannot do that, I'm going to ask the deputy to document your presence and ask you to leave." The deputy stepped forward. He was quiet and professional. He confirmed he had received a call from the property owner. He asked the visiting party to identify themselves. What happened next took about 20 minutes but felt much longer. There were no raised voices after the first few minutes. There was no violence. There was just the slow, grinding sound of a strategy collapsing under the weight of its own weakness. The representative could not produce a court order. Because there was no court order. Because the challenge to the will had not yet been filed, only threatened. Which meant they had shown up at my property, with a law firm representative, on no legal authority whatsoever, because they genuinely assumed that I would be flustered enough, or guilty enough, or alone enough, to back down. My father tried one more time. He waited until the representative had stepped back and Marcus was speaking quietly with the deputy. He walked toward me across the gravel, and his voice dropped to something that might have been intended as gentle. "I know this is hard," he said. "Losing her was hard for all of us. But Tyler is he's struggling, Clara. You have a good job, a good apartment. You don't need a farmhouse in Clarksville." "He does." I looked at my father. I thought about all the years I had spent hoping that this moment would come differently. Hoping that he would look at me the way parents look at their children when they actually see them. I thought about the Christmas he missed when I was 12 because he had a work trip he couldn't rearrange. I thought about the graduation where he arrived late and left early. I thought about every phone call where the conversation eventually found its way to Tyler or to Richard's kids and stayed there. And I thought about every Sunday I spent at that kitchen table. Every prescription I picked up. Every appointment I drove to. Every evening I stayed late because my grandmother had said, without quite saying it, that she didn't want to be alone in the quiet. I was here, I said. My voice was quiet. When she was sick. When she was scared. When she asked me to stay. I was here, and I will not apologize for that, and I will not give this away to make someone else's life easier. He looked at me for a long moment. I don't know what he was looking for. He didn't find it. You've become very hard, he said. I've become very clear, I said. Marcus returned and asked the visiting party to leave. The deputy confirmed the visit had been documented. My father walked to his car without looking at me again. My uncle followed. Deanna paused at the edge of the gravel and looked back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, not quite apology, not quite anything she was prepared to say out loud. Then she got in the car. The representative left last, and as he passed Marcus, the two men exchanged a look that communicated something I wasn't entirely privy to but that Marcus later described, with dry understatement, as an alignment of expectations. When all three vehicles had gone, I stood on the porch of my grandmother's house for a long time. The two oak trees flanked the front path exactly as they always had. A cardinal landed on the closer one, sat there for a moment and flew away. The camera above the door blinked its small steady light. Helen appeared at the fence. She had clearly witnessed some portion of the morning's events from her window, because she had the look of someone who has been watching and choosing not to intervene until the moment is right. "You okay, honey?" she called. "Yes," I said. And I was surprised to find that I meant it. Marcus filed a preemptive response brief the following week, attaching the video documentation of the unauthorized visit, the camera timestamps, the deputy's report, and a letter noting that any future contact regarding the estate was to go through legal counsel only. The challenge to the will was formally filed 2 weeks after that. It took 7 months to work through the courts. At no point did my father's side produce a single credible witness or document that contradicted my grandmother's recorded statement, her physician's notes, or the testimony of Howard Beckett, who had known her for a decade. The estate was settled in my name. I moved into the farmhouse the following spring. I kept the biscuit recipe folded inside the kitchen drawer where she had always kept it. I kept the cardigan on the coat rack by the front door for the first 3 months, and then one afternoon I took it down and folded it carefully into a cedar chest in the bedroom. It felt like the right time. My father called once after the ruling. It was a short call. He did not apologize. He said he hoped we could move past this someday, which is the thing people say when they have done something they are not prepared to name but would like to stop being held responsible for. I told him that I was open to a relationship with him, but that it would require honesty about what had happened. He said that was fair. He has not called since. I have not decided how I feel about that yet. Some days I am sad about it in the way you are sad about something that was already broken before you found it. Other days I feel something much closer to peace. What I do know is this. There is a particular cruelty in being the strong one. Not the cruelty of being asked too much, though that is real, but the cruelty of having your strength used as a justification for your dispensability. As if being capable of handling difficulty means you are disqualified from being protected from it. As if loving people reliably means you have forfeited the right to be loved back. I spent a long time believing that strength meant being the person who never asked for anything. I have spent the last year learning that real strength is knowing what belongs to you and being willing to say so. The oak trees are still there. Both of them. They are taller than I remembered, or maybe I just look at them differently now. In the mornings I drink my coffee on the porch and watch the light come through the branches, and sometimes I talk to my grandmother the way you talk to someone when you are not entirely sure they can hear you, but you are not entirely sure they can't. I tell her I kept the house. I tell her it looks the same. I tell her she was right, all those years ago at that kitchen table, when she said I was going to be more than okay. She was always right about me. I just had to be willing to believe her.